Most people think power belongs to those who are bold, to the ones who speak up, who challenge rules, who refuse to fit. We are told that courage creates progress, that intelligence is rewarded, that those who see clearly eventually rise. And sometimes, that's true. But if that were the whole story, modern systems wouldn't look the way they do. Because the people who move fastest inside systems are rarely the most insightful ones. They are the most reliable. They respond the same way, to the same signals, under the same conditions. Their behavior can be modeled. Their reactions can be anticipated. Their outcomes can be planned. Intelligence doesn't scale like that. Insight introduces variation. Questions slow momentum. Clarity disrupts flow. And systems don't collapse because of ignorance. They collapse because of friction. So modern power doesn't fight intelligence. It simply stops rewarding it. It offers something else instead. Stability, predictability, safety. Not as a command, not as a threat, but as an exchange. Behave in ways we can anticipate, and the system will carry you forward. Deviate too often, and progress becomes expensive. This is not a story about villains, and it's not a story about oppression. It's a story about training, about how power no longer needs to defeat you, because it can simply outlast you. And once you see how this works, you'll understand why predictability became the most valuable currency in modern systems, and why those who notice it rarely talk about it out loud. Power doesn't fail because of intelligence. It fails because intelligence is expensive. Intelligence asks questions. Questions slow processes. Intelligence notices inconsistencies. Inconsistencies interrupt flow. Intelligence introduces variation. And variation is the one thing systems cannot afford at scale. Systems are not designed to discover truth. They are designed to maintain continuity. Continuity requires repetition. Repetition requires predictability. This is why intelligence creates tension. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's inefficient. Intelligence doesn't move in straight lines. It pauses. It recalibrates. It sometimes changes direction entirely. Systems don't do that. Systems move forward by reducing uncertainty. And the fastest way to reduce uncertainty is not to eliminate intelligence, but to stop rewarding it. So no, systems don't fear intelligent people. They fear what intelligent behavior produces. Outcomes that can't be modeled. Decisions that don't repeat. Paths that don't scale. And anything that can't be modeled, can't be reliably controlled. That's the problem. Not intelligence, but what intelligence refuses to become. Modern power doesn't operate through force. It operates through normalization. It doesn't need to control you directly. It doesn't need to watch every move you make. It only needs one thing: most people behaving in similar ways. That's why modern systems are built, not around commands, but around frameworks, rules, procedures, metrics, evaluations, protocols. None of these are violent. None of them feel oppressive. They feel reasonable. Rules define what is acceptable. Procedures define how things are done. KPIs define what matters. Evaluations decide who progresses. Protocols decide who deviates. Together, they do something far more effective than force. They standardize behavior. When behavior becomes standardized, outcomes become predictable. When outcomes are predictable, they can be planned. When they can be planned, they can be optimized. And when they can be optimized, they can be controlled, without ever appearing to control anyone. This is the genius of modern power. It doesn't silence difference. It makes difference inefficient. You are free to think differently. You are free to act differently. You just won't be rewarded for it. Over time, most people learn the pattern, not through punishment, through feedback. What gets approved? What gets promoted? What quietly stops moving? And slowly, without instruction, behavior converges. This is how systems scale. Not by controlling individuals, but by aligning incentives. When incentives align, compliance feels like choice, and predictability becomes the real currency of power. You are not told what to think. You are not ordered how to behave. You are simply shown what works, what gets approved, what gets rewarded, what gets repeated. And you are shown something else, too, what quietly stops moving. This is why modern control feels like freedom, because nothing is demanded, nothing is forced. You still choose, but the environment chooses, the price of each choice. Say the expected thing, and everything stays smooth. Ask the wrong question, and the room cools down. You don't get punished. You just become inconvenient, not dangerous, not wrong, expensive. And here is how the illusion becomes complete. You start adapting before anyone asks you to. You simplify your truth. You compress your thoughts. You remove the parts that require explanation. Not because you're afraid, because you're tired of the exchange rate. Every system has an unspoken currency. In some places it's speed. In others, it's harmony. In others, it's loyalty. But the real currency is always the same. Predictability. And unpredictability isn't punished loudly. It's punished quietly, through inefficiency. Meetings take longer. Requests stall. Support disappears. You get misunderstood. Not because you are unclear, because clarity creates friction. Eventually, most people do something. That feels responsible. They stop introducing friction. They stop being unpredictable. And this is the moment. Control stops needing to chase you. Because you start chasing stability. This is why you can't always identify the villain. There's no threat, no dictator, no obvious enemy. Just incentives. A reward system that slowly trains your nervous system to prefer what is cheaper over what is true. And that's why this feels like your decision. You're in a room, a meeting, a discussion. You notice something doesn't add up. The numbers are right, but the conclusion isn't. You feel it. You know it. You almost speak. And then you calculate how much explaining it would take, how much resistance it would create, how much slower everything would become. So you stay quiet. Nothing bad happens. Nothing dramatic. The meeting moves on. Everyone feels relieved. And something inside you quietly adjusts. This is the conflict. No one explains to you. Unpredictability is power, but only at the individual level. It gives you leverage, flexibility, room to move. It allows you to see options before they become obvious. Predictability is also power, but only at the systemic level. It allows coordination, planning, scale. Systems don't grow by insight. They grow by repetition. And here's the problem. What gives you freedom creates instability for the system. And what stabilizes the system reduces your range of movement. This is why the system doesn't need to suppress you. It just needs you to choose stability, often enough. Not always, just consistently. Every time you stay quiet, to keep things smooth. Every time you simplify what you really think. Every time you avoid friction. You are not losing power. You are relocating it from yourself to the system. And that trade doesn't feel violent. It feels mature, responsible, professional, which is why most people never notice when it becomes permanent. That's why systems don't defeat individuals. They outlast them. They don't argue. They don't confront. They don't even oppose you. They wait. Systems understand something most people don't. Time works in their favor. You don't need to be convinced. You don't need to be corrected. You just need to adapt, often enough. Over time, most people learn the same lesson. Not because they were wrong, not because they were weak, but because resistance has a cost, and predictability is always cheaper. This is why control no longer needs pressure. It doesn't force compliance. It rewards efficiency. Slowly, quietly, most people stop noticing when the adjustment became permanent, when flexibility turned into routine, when silence turned into habit, when adaptation stopped being strategic and started being automatic. Unpredictability gives power to the individual. Predictability gives power to the system. No one defeats you. The system teaches you that being predictable is cheaper than being free. And once you understand this, something else becomes impossible to ignore, because predictability doesn't just give power to systems. It creates something that feels even safer. Stability. Stability is presented as a reward, as rest, as arrival. But here's the part no one warns you about. Stability doesn't just protect you. It slowly limits your movement. And the longer you stay inside it, the harder it becomes to tell whether you're safe or owned. That's where the real trap begins.